All right, welcome to the Squad44 map making tutorial part 1. This tutorial is going to teach you everything you need to know about Squad44 mapping, and in part 1 we'll be going over the very basics, which will include where to find the SDK, how to install it, then the very basics of getting yourself started with your first map, creating a mod, getting the landscape set up, and ultimately then getting a decal set up on your map so you'll be ready to start mapping when you're done with part 1 of this tutorial. Part 2 will then cover some of the basics of actually mapping, but for part 1 we're just getting you set up. It's worth noting that in this tutorial we are not going to be importing a landscape. We're not going to be importing a height map. So in this tutorial we will not be importing a height map. We're going to do all of our terrain sculpting by hand. And let's get right into it. So the very first thing, finding and installing the SDK. Here I have the SDK open, but how do you get it? That's through the Epic Games Store. So if you don't have the Epic Games launcher installed, you will need to search online and get that installed. But once you have the Epic Games launcher, you'll go up here in the store. If you type Squad44, you will see Squad44 mod SDK pop up there. When you click on that, it'll bring you to the page. You can see it is free. You do not need to pay money for this. You don't even need to own Squad44 first. There's no prerequisite, no money. You just simply download it. So I already have it in my library, so you would need to go ahead and install this. Once it's installed, you can go to your library here. It brings up everything in your library, and here you can see Squad44 mod SDK. Anything you used recently will also be in your quick launch. So I have it there. I believe hitting this little heart that I have here will keep it in your quick launch. I'm not 100% sure, but because that's like really all I use in here. But yeah, so you would install that, go to your library, and click on it to run it. And the first time you open it, it is going to take a very long time to open. It might not take as long as I'm making it seem. If you have really good RAM, maybe a really good CPU will help. But for the most part, it's going to take a while the very first time you open the SDK and the very first time you open certain things within the SDK. So here on my screen, I have St. Mary du Mont open. And this took me maybe 15 minutes to open, maybe 10. If this is your very first time opening this map, it could take up to an hour, I'd say. So things will take a long time to load the first time you open them. So be prepared for that. Don't think you're going to install the SDK and you're going to get right to work. You'll probably want to install the SDK, open it up, go cook dinner or something, come back, try to open a map, go eat dinner, and then maybe tomorrow you can work on it. So it does take a long time the very first time you do these things. But with that being said, once you do have something open, I'm going to show you a few things. So first, if you have your SDK open, it probably looks a little different than what I have here because in Unreal Engine, which the SDK is really just a tailored instance of Unreal Engine 4.27. It's pretty much Unreal 4.27 with a bunch of the game assets already preloaded in. And in Unreal Engine, you can customize the UI, which is really nice. So something that you'll probably see different is I don't think you'll have this levels tab here. I think you'll have the other stuff here. Not entirely sure. And you'll probably only have one content browser. So when you want to add things, let me actually just X that out. So now I've gotten rid of that levels window. If you go to Windows and you click levels here, it's going to add it. Now for me, it remembers where I had it. For you, it might just pop it out here, or it might throw it somewhere else, but you can put it really wherever you want it. Could even do some weird things like that. So however you want it to look, this is kind of the standard in the community, is to just throw it up there. So that's what I'm going to recommend, but if you have a different preference, you're welcome to put it there. And then the content browsers. Again, if I were to get rid of my other content browsers here, this is probably what it looks like for you. And if you come down here to content browser, you can add up to 4. And again, it remembers where I had it, but if it didn't, I would just drag it down here. And then content browser 3, again, it remembers, but if it didn't, I just come down and drag it right there. So you can customize the UI. That's how you get it set up to look the way it looks here in this tutorial. Not everyone uses 3 content browsers. For mapping, probably 2 is fine, but 3 can come in handy. Some people, well, I know of at least one person that uses 4. But again, for mapping, you probably don't need that many. That's more if you're working with a bunch of different blueprints and stuff, it could be useful. But whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong answer there. So the next thing is you'll also notice if you're just on your content folder here, you probably don't see like this developer folder on your screen. And that's because there are certain things that are hidden by default. So if you go to any of your content browsers and hit view options here, there's going to be these check boxes for what you can see. Now, all the stuff I have here you don't necessarily need except show plugin content. You're going to want to make sure that's checked. Everything else you really don't need to check. I just like to snoop around and look at things. But show plugin content is definitely going to need to be checked. And that's because any mod created for the game is, as far as Unreal Engine is concerned, is a plugin for the game. So if you don't have that show plugin content visible, you won't be able to see your mod when you create it. All right. And then before we actually get to creating the mod, I'm going to go through a few things by looking at this map here, which is, as you can see here, St. Mary Dumont Offensive Random 01. I picked this one because I like the map, and 2, it started out as a modded map, and now it is in the base game. So I thought it would be nice to have this map up for this map making tutorial. The very first thing is you can see I'm moving around my viewport right here. But how do you do that? If you just touch nothing and you move your mouse just moves over the viewport. You can see my little crosshair cursor right there. If I want to look around my viewport, I'm going to hold right click, and then as I move my mouse, my camera moves. And while I'm holding right click, I can use W, A, S, and D to fly around within the viewport. Also, Q will make you fly straight down, and E will make you fly straight up. There are a few other hotkeys that we'll go over in a little bit, but that's how you navigate through the viewport. Next, we're going to look at these different levels here. So when you are creating a map, you're going to need multiple different levels. Some people call them layers. So if you're watching different tutorials and you hear layers referred to, they're referring to the same thing. It's levels, layers. Officially, they're called levels, but some people call them layers. And a level in Unreal is something that you load into where you move a controlled character around a space. So in the way Squad44 has it set up, there's always a gameplay level, which up here just says persistent level, because whatever level you have open is just going to say persistent level. In this case, it's St. Mary Dumont Offensive Random 01. That is what we call the gameplay level. Within your gameplay level, you are going to have a geo. Now, the geo, if I were to hide, well, it doesn't really matter. The geo is everything you can see here. It's the landscape, it's the foliage, it's the buildings, it's all the objects. It's everything that really makes the map. That is your geo. So your geo is the main thing you'll be working on for really almost all parts of this tutorial. The geo is the map itself. Then here we have a few different ones because the way random offensive works, it randomly selects lighting, but here we have different lighting levels. It's only necessary to have one lighting level, but you can have a bunch of different ones, and then in the level blueprint, which we'll get to in a later tutorial, for random offensive, it will randomly choose one of these lightings to actually use each time the map is loaded. But it's only necessary to have one lighting level, and that's where, of course, your light and your fog settings, if you're going to have rain, your clouds in the sky, all that is in your lighting level. A lot of new people will put their lighting right into their geo or right into their gameplay level. You don't want to do that. You want separate levels for your lighting. It's just because that's how the rest of the game is set up, and you want everything to be uniform so it works with all the game's existing systems. And then we have the gameplay level, which here says persistent level, but again, St. Mary Dumont Offensive Random 01. The gameplay level is what contains, first of all of these other levels. So all of these other levels are loaded into this gameplay level. That's why we can see them here when we have the gameplay level open. And it also includes everything about the gameplay. So if I were to press the letter G here on my keyboard, it shows me kind of all the editor view things. So things that you're not going to see when you're playing. You can see all these boxes and spheres, and we can see the green lines of the splines. And if we look at all the red stuff, the boxes and spheres, that's all stuff to do with the gameplay level. So some of these things are out of bounds minefields, like these boxes over here. This is probably a staging zone right here. These spheres are objectives, they're main bases, all this other stuff, which we'll cover in later tutorials. But that's all the stuff that goes in your gameplay level, is everything directly related to the gameplay, which makes sense. And the reason it's all set up like this is because as you're creating your map, you want everything to be on the geo, so you can have 20 different gameplay levels if you wanted, that all reference the same geo level, and all you have to do is drag and drop your geo level into your levels here for each gameplay level, and your map is in there. And that's so you don't want any gameplay stuff on your geo, you don't want any lighting in there, you just want the map itself. That, if it doesn't make sense why it's the case now, it will as we go through these tutorials, but that's the way we want it set up. We also see different things in here. So first, I'm going to unlock the geo level. It's locked by default, and you do have these locks here. You can lock and unlock levels as you need. This is potentially important if you're working, let's say, on your geo. You might want to lock all the other things so you don't accidentally edit something on there, or what's more likely, so you don't accidentally put something into your gameplay level that you meant to put on your geo, because each time you load the map, you're going to need to make sure you set the geo as your current, which I'll show you right now. So I'm going to unlock the geo, and right now we see that the persistent level, the text is blue, the text is white. That means our current level, the level that we're currently editing as we do things in here, is the persistent level. If I wanted to actually change things on this map, I would right click on the geo, make current. And now we can see that text is blue. That's my current level. So now if I were to add anything to the map at this point, it would be added to the geo because that's my current level. That's something you'll have to do each time you open your map, is set the current level to whatever level you're working on, which is most likely going to be the geo. And for that reason, I would recommend you probably want to lock all your other levels until you're ready to work on them. So when you load up your map, you don't accidentally add something to the wrong level. Now, I say that, but I personally don't lock them. Just bad habit, I guess. And sometimes I will accidentally start putting houses and stuff down on the persistent level, and then I'll have to go and move them over to the geo once I realize my mistake, which is something I'll show in a later tutorial how to do that. But as we look here on the geo, and I am quickly going to render the landscape, which we can see here, these roads are like black and the landscape looks a little weird. We'll have to use this landscape renderer, which I'll cover probably in the next tutorial, but for now we're just going to click render landscape, and now everything looks the way it's supposed to. And this will let us look at the map a little. So there are three main types of things on the map. There's static mesh actors, which they don't have to be static mesh actors. They could be blueprint actors. They could be skeletal mesh actors. So we'll just say that there are objects on the map. These are your houses. These are boxes and crates. Let me slow down my camera here. Which, by the way, if you want to slow down your fly speed while you're holding right click, just mouse wheel down or mouse wheel up to speed up. That's how you change your fly speed. All these houses, this little roof here, this wagon, these pipes, these logs, all this stuff, these are objects, and that's stuff you'll edit through the select mode in these modes up here. Then there are splines, which if I press G, we can see all of our splines. That's all these green lines, which if we zoom out, we will really be able to see. All these green lines are splines. Splines, again, we'll cover in a different tutorial. But yeah, they exist, and they're useful for doing anything with curves, anything that needs to follow the contours of your terrain. Or it can actually be used for editing the contours of your terrain in a specific way. Very useful things, but something we will cover in probably the next tutorial because there's a lot you can do with them. And then the last thing we have is foliage. So foliage, obviously it's trees and bushes and things like that, but it doesn't have to just be that. You can pretty much turn anything into a foliage actor, and it's very useful for things you want to paint on in a more random way. So when we're placing objects like houses and sheds and wagons, we are placing them and we are choosing exactly where it goes, exactly how it's rotated, all that stuff when we place it, because it's important for things like that. But anything you do with foliage, while you can individually place them and rotate them for each single one, which there might be certain instances where you want to do that, for the most part, we would come here to our foliage tool, and you'll see that there's a paint option, and you can double click on something or multiple things. If I want to paint them all at once, you can set your brush size, and you would be able to paint them right onto your map. So it's very useful. Like, all these bushes were not hand placed. They were painted just with this brush here, just like that. So with that being said, it's not always just foliage that you'll do that with. Sometimes people do that with hay bales. I like to do it with wood planks just on the ground. So anything that you kind of want to just be able to paint around and kind of have it spawn in a more random fashion is something you want the foliage tool for. Like small rocks and stuff, if you want to paint small rocks on the side of your road, or on the breast map that I made, I did leaves in the gutters, which I guess is still technically actual foliage. But you get the idea. If I were to come to the select mode here and click on a piece of foliage, it's going to select all the foliage on the map. There's really no reason you would want to do this when you're editing your map, but it's useful for showing you all the things that are done with the foliage tool on this particular map. You can see there's a lot of stuff. I'm trying to see, I thought he used hay bales as foliage on this map, but I'm not going to spend too long looking for it if I can't find it. Well, I cannot find it, so you'll just have to trust me that you can indeed use it for things that aren't actually foliage. With foliage, there's also procedural foliage volumes, which we will cover in a separate tutorial. We might have a completely unique tutorial just for procedural foliage volumes. I'm not sure yet exactly how I'll split that up, but it will make things like forests, and I've been using it for hedgerows. It'll make stuff like that a lot easier. So, with all that said, let's see what's next on my list here. I think we are ready to set up our own mod. So the first thing, we're going to want to think about how big do we want our map to be. There's a lot of the old chapter 1 maps are 4x4 kilometers, which is my personal preference. There are some that are 5x5 kilometers. Actually, Healsome is 5.5 by 5.5. It's the largest map in the game. Even bigger than Creole. For you guys that know the modded map Creole, it is slightly bigger than Creole. It's just, unfortunately, a lot of the Healsome map is unused. But anyway, so either way, you're going to want to decide on a size. So you might want to look at a bunch of different maps, see what feels like a size you like. And you'll also want to weigh that against how long you want the map to take. So obviously a 5x5 map, that might be awesome to have all that space for gameplay, especially for events and stuff. A 5x5 map would be really nice, but it is going to be a lot of work. So like if we compare a 2x2 map to a 4x4 map, 2x2 is not, like 4x4 isn't twice as big as a 2x2 map. It's what, like 4 times as big because it's all squared. So when you are thinking of bigger maps, it does get kind of exponentially larger as you increase the perimeter dimensions. So that's something to consider. And also, if you're going to do something, a more urban environment, definitely consider size when you do that, because you don't want to run into performance issues either. Now, with that said, what size is this map? Well, this map is doing something that I actually really like, and I started to do that with a new map I'm working on, is the terrain size as a whole is actually 5x5 kilometers or thereabouts. I think it's like 5,100 or something. But the playable area is 4x4. So if we zoom out a little, we can see over here, you can see it nicely. There's a little elevated bit of ground here, and you can kind of see it over here at the top. It's a little hard to see my cursor because it turns into the gray crosshair, but up at the top of my screen and going down here, you can see this elevated area. That marks the edge of the actual playable area, and if I press a G, you can also see these boxes, these box volumes going around the edges. Those are marking the playable area, and that's actually what his mini-map covers. His mini-map doesn't cover outside of that. And what that does is when you're playing, you can go right up to here before you hit the out-of-bounds minefield. But now there's a 500-meter buffer where it doesn't have to be super detailed. As you can see here, it's not very detailed, but it looks nicer than just the edge of the map being right here, and you just like, you know, you would just fall off the edge of the map. So that's what we're going to do when we set up our mod for the tutorial here. We're going to do 4x4 kilometers of playable area, but we're going to set up our terrain to be 5x5 kilometers. Just because I think that's nice, and that is a habit I would like to encourage. The next thing we're going to do, if we go to the landscape here, and we go to resize, so unfortunately, this doesn't tell us like the settings that he has here for his map, Christmas map here. But what it does tell us is 127 by 127 quads and 2 by 2 sections is the default like settings for Squad44 map. So we're just going to want to remember that from when we set up our map. All right. And then with all that, we're ready to set up our own mod. So to set up our mod, we're going to click this modding hub button right here. And we will need a preview image. I was messing with this before, so it has a preview image loaded. But if it didn't, you'd go to select image. You'd go to wherever you have your image saved, here. And you want your image to be 128 by 128 pixels. Maybe it can be smaller, but some things get finicky with the SDK. Just find an image or make an image that's 128 by 128 so you don't run into any issues later. So I have that. I don't know. Okay, I don't know why auto saved just then, but yeah, you select the image. It worked. I just want to show you again. Okay, so I've got my image selected. Now you need a mod name. Now I'm going to just for this example be making Chef DuPont. So I could go Chef DuPont right here, but you can't have any spaces. And unfortunately, the SDK doesn't tell you you can't have spaces. But if you did all this work to make your map and then you try to cook out your mod, you're going to run into issues because it won't like the spaces. So never put spaces in here. So I'm just going to do it this way, Chef DuPont, and separate it with capital letters. And then I don't remember if you actually have to have a description, but let's just put one in there. And I'll just make it the same as the name, just so the SDK doesn't get upset with us. So now we have our image, 128 by 128. We have our mod name. We have our description. And we are good to go. Make sure also new mod is selected, not load and edit or share. I don't see why those would be selected by default, but just in case, make sure new mod is selected. And then we hit create. And then when we hit create, we can see one of our content browsers automatically went to our Chef DuPont content folder, which is pretty nice. So if we click on this folder button, we will have all the files included in the SDK here. Now on mine, you're going to see things that you're not going to see because I have a whole bunch of mods that were shared with the PSRM team. So we have all these that you're not going to see in your SDK, but you will see content. You'll see a few other things like C++ classes, and then hopefully you also see your mod. Now remember, if you don't see your mod, go to view options, make sure show plugin content is enabled. But we have your mod here. It'll be below all of the content in the actual game. So you could collapse that. Chef DuPont content, there's our mod. Now, it was suggested to me by Wolfram, because this is something I don't do, but if you hit this little show or hide sources panel button, it brings up the folder view here, which there's very few things you really need to use this view for, but one thing you can do with it is if you find your mod, you can right click and you can set a color for your mod. This is a color I've already used, but you could do a new color and you can just pick whatever color you want. Maybe I want this nice bright teal turquoise color. And now you can see my mod folder has that color. And it does here. So it's a little easier to find as you're scrolling through everything. So it's something you can do if you would like. So now our mod is created. Now what? So we could go through making a whole gameplay level from scratch and then going from there. But we're not going to do that. One thing that's nice about working in the SDK is you already have all the files from the game that developers already made for you. So when possible, we're going to use what already exists in the game to make our lives easier. So I'm not going to make a whole new gameplay level. I am simply going to copy over the St. Mary Dumont gameplay level and then delete the geo and put our own geo in there, and then we can edit the gameplay level at a later time to suit our needs. So to do that, we're in the content folder here. We need to go to Postscriptum, Maps, then we'll scroll down to St. Mary Dumont, and we will go to Maps, Offensive, Random, and here it is. So let me actually, I'm going to hit Save All here. It's going to bring this up. I don't want to save this, so I'm going to uncheck that. Hit Save Selected just so it doesn't accidentally save. And we are going to copy this over into our mod simply by dragging it and dropping it right in and going copy here. And we see this little thing appears. This is always there. It's just hidden. But now that we've copied something, it appears. Don't worry about that. This is the level blueprint, which we'll use in a later tutorial. And there is one here. It just doesn't show until it needs to. We're going to rename this from St. Mary Dumont to Chef Dupont. Whenever you rename something, it saves it. And then we're going to open it. It's going to ask if we want to save this. I don't want to save this. I don't want to save any of the changes I made. And that should load pretty quick. But while it's loading, I'm going to talk about what needs to be copied into your mod. So anything in my Chef Dupont content folder is going to be packaged in my mod when I cook it, when I build the mod, when I'm all ready to say I'm ready for other people to play this. I'm ready to put it on the Steam Workshop. Anything in this folder will be part of my mod. But what needs to be in there? Like if I put a house on my map, do I need that house in my mod? No. You only need things in your mod that you are making changes to. So if you're just using a vanilla house and dropping it onto your map, you're not making any changes to that house asset, so you don't need a copy of it. But if I wanted to go in and edit the collision, like I wanted to export that map, change the collision, or I wanted to destroy a wall or something, well, now I'm going to need a copy of that asset. Really, I would just, I guess in that particular case, I would just import a new copy of the map or the building into my mod. But you get the idea. Only things that you make changes to need to be in your mod. You don't need to put everything that's on your map. So it loads, you get this message log. You can just close that out. And we can see it looks exactly like the map we were just on, but that's because we made a copy. But we can confirm we're at the right thing because down here it says Chef Dupont Offensive Random 01. So we have the gameplay level that we just created right here. Now I'm actually going to make a new folder here called Maps, and I'm going to drag and drop that into the folder and move. I should have done that the first time. We'll wait for that to figure itself out here. And then in here, I guess it's fine this way. It's okay. So now this, we don't want this geo, right? This is the St. Mary Dumont geo. I'm confirming that I'm in the Chef Dupont Offensive Random 01 gameplay level. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to delete this geo. Removing levels cannot be undone. Proceed. Yes. And now that the geo is gone, we can see pretty much the whole map's gone. Like I was saying, the entire map is the geo. Everything else is just gameplay and lighting. But now we need to make a new geo level. So to do that, we can either right click and do level, or we can do add/import and do level. Either way works. And we're going to call this Chef Dupont _geo. And then to add this to our gameplay level, we just simply take this and drag it and drop it right into here. And now we have our geo here. And we can also see the text is blue. When you add a level, it automatically makes it your current level, which is nice. But one thing I didn't talk about yet is we have these little blue dots next to these levels. These blue dots mean that these levels are blueprint only. So these levels exist within the gameplay level, but they won't actually appear unless they're told to by a blueprint, which is why I mentioned the level blueprint earlier, but that's not the scope of this. But the geo level, we don't want that to only appear when it's called in a blueprint. We want that to always be there. So for that, we're going to right click on it, go to change streaming method, and go to always loaded. So whenever this map is loaded, the geo is going to load without being told to by a blueprint. So there we go. And now we're ready to create a landscape. So, and this is, I should have set this up a little different because now I don't know which way is north, but that's okay. We don't need that right now, but I will need to figure out which way is north in a second. We're going to go to modes, landscape, and we're going to set up a landscape. So right, it automatically brings us to new because it recognizes there is no landscape currently. So the only thing you can do with landscape is create a new one. We're going to need a landscape material. And I think if I remember right, I had issues with this one before. Yeah, ground blend field. I think I want this one. If I reference viewer this, it's not referenced by the geo. I don't remember. If I go to material instance, well, what we will do is we will find a different landscape material to use. If I search landscape, hopefully, yeah, so we've got some ones here. Here we go. Landscape St. Mary Dumont. That could be it. It's a little concerning that the material just looks black there. Okay, here we go. So it's referenced by St. Mary Dumont. This is my map, so don't worry about that. But it's referenced by the St. Mary Dumont geo. So we should be good to use this one. If we drag and drop it there, that's the landscape material it's going to use. The landscape material, it's something you can edit, but it's what contains all these layers here. So we're going to have a grass, a dirt B, field, pavement, gravel, forest, and puddles layer that we can paint on our terrain. If I look at this and I'm like, I wanted something else, or this is not what I wanted, I could find a different landscape material. What you're probably best off doing is finding a vanilla map where you like the landscape material and using that. If you're interested in trying to make your own landscape material, I'm not sure if I'll do a tutorial on that one. But if you wanted to try to figure that out, there probably are tutorials out there for landscape materials in Unreal 4.27 because that's not something unique to this game as far as I know. Although I could be wrong. Either way, you could find one that's closest to what you want, make a copy of it into your mod, and then edit it as you want and use that. And you can also change this later, but I would recommend not really painting your landscape until you are set on your landscape material. And either way, that's the landscape material we're going to use. So the next thing is actually setting up the size of the landscape. So earlier we looked, and I told you to remember, I hope you remembered, that we want 127 by 127 quads and 2 by 2 sections. And When we do that, it gives us our overall resolution. This is essentially the dimensions of our landscape. So if we were to just leave it like this, it would be a roughly 2 by 2 kilometer map. 2033 meters by 2033 meters is a 2 by 2 kilometer map. But we said we wanted to go for 5 by 5 kilometers with the 4 by 4 landscape. So we're going to have to change the number of components. Now, there probably is some math where you could just figure out what the number of components is. I like to do trial and error. So if I do 10 and 10, we can see it goes up to 2541 by 2541. I think what we want is something like 19 by 19. That's a little too small. Maybe it was just 20 by 20. Yeah, so that gives us just over 5 by 5. And yeah, 5 by 5. We should be good there. So I'm just looking here. This is what I was trying to find, the location. We are at 0, 0, 100. I think we want to be at 0, 0, 0 here. Yeah, there we go. Now everything's on the right plane. You could set that to be whatever you want. There might be a reason to do 0, 0, 100, but I wanted it to line up with what St. Mary du Mont was, which it looks like it was 0, 0, 0. And yeah, now it looks like we are good to go on the landscape. So I'm going to hit create. All right, and our landscape is here, but it looks awful. And we're not going to get into landscape terrain painting today, but I will show you how to set up the landscape at least a little bit. Oops, I didn't want to do sculpt there. Let me undo that. So if we go to modes, select, and I select the landscape. Oh, you know what? This is what I could have done on St. Mary du Mont to show you everything. But either way, we can see we have our landscape material. So if you did want to swap out the landscape material, you could change that. And I also just realized this is not where we want to be. We want to be landscape here. And if we go to paint, we have these different layers. But right now, each layer has none in this little spot here. It needs layer info. So we're going to go in here and make a new folder and call it layer infos. And what this is when we paint on our landscape, Unreal Engine is going to take all that data of what blend of each thing here is in each coordinate on the map, and it's going to save that data in a layer info so that it knows where grass should show, where dirt should show, etc. So we have our layer infos folder. We're going to hit this little create layer info button, and we're going to do a weight blended layer. And we're going to put it in Chef DuPont layer infos. It's going to automatically name it for us. That's fine. And there we have grass layer info. We're going to do this for each layer here. Also notice as we do it, it fills in the layer info with what we have here. And we have our layer infos. And right now, grass is our whole landscape, which I think is the best way to start. I did try my most recent map starting it all with field here, but I think that maybe only makes sense if you're doing a more urban map or something where you're going to have less grass. If grass is going to be most of your map, just have grass. But if you did want it to be something else, if you right click on one of these layers and you do fill layer, it's going to fill your entire landscape with that after it thinks for a bit. There we go. So now we have our field texture as our main one, but I'm going to switch it back to grass. And there we go. Now, one thing we do have to do with these layer infos is we have to set a fizz mat on them. So a fizz mat in Unreal Engine, if we open up this dirt layer info, currently fizz material, which is commonly referred to as a fizz mat, is kind of what tells Unreal Engine and the game how things should interact with it. A lot of things are interacting based on the fizz mat. So the most important thing for what these are going to be is it's important for the sounds your footsteps make. So if we don't set these right, like when we walk on the pavement, it'll sound like we're walking on dirt or something, whatever the default is. So we do want to set these up, and you will probably only see PS Fizzmat Dirt here because this is a PSRM thing. So you'll set that up, hit save, and go to the next one. And Dirt B can also have dirt. Field can also be dirt. This is also important for some explosion effects. Some of those will look different based on what material, what fizz mat it's hitting. Now, forest, we could do dirt, but I'm going to see. I haven't actually tested this out. And also, you're probably best off using only fizz mats that start with PS, not these. You can try it and see if it works right, but I would recommend sticking to ones from PS, not from Squad. I'm going to see how this one works if we were to walk on it, if it sounds good. If it sounds awful, I'll just make it dirt. And that's another thing. You can just change these at any time. It's not like you're married to them. Here we'll do grass. And then if you have other mods and you see like the exact same name, it is worth hovering over to see the path. So this is a vanilla one. This is from the Feb mod, so I don't want to use that. If you don't have any other mods, whether it's one you created or one you got from someone else, then you don't really have to worry about that. Pavement, we'll do asphalt. And puddles, I don't think there's a puddles. There's not, but there is mud, I believe. We'll try mud, see how that feels. With puddles, I just want to make sure it has that like squishy footsteps when you walk on it. So hopefully mud has that. We'll have to find out, but we'll probably find that out in a later tutorial. So now we have our layer infos set up. We're not going to be painting any landscape today, but it is set up for when we do that. And let's see what is next. All right, so I will show you quickly how to, does this, sorry, no, it doesn't, okay. I'm going to show you real quick how to sculpt your terrain in a very basic manner. I'm not going to go through techniques or anything today, but I will show you how to do it. So you're going to go to modes, you're going to go to landscape, you're going to go to sculpt. And then here you have the Sculpt tool. And if we come close to the map here, we can see our brush. We can increase the size or decrease the size of the brush by doing the radius here. You can just kind of drag it. You can also click on it and type a number if there's a certain size you want. You can also type it over here if you wanted. And we have the strength. Ooh, I don't know why this looks like this. This has been happening to me sometimes when I load the editor. It has these weird shadows, but only sometimes. I think this is a me issue. You guys probably won't see this, so I'll have to see what's causing that. Either way, tool strength is 0.1 right now. I think by default it'll be at 1 for you. 1 is very, very strong. You can try painting with it, but it is very strong. That's going to be for like sculpting like large, like a Denant mountain or something. I'm going to do a decent size radius here. Just go up to like 2000. And we'll just sculpt an area here. Zoom in a little so we can see what we're doing. And I'm not doing this like for any particular reason other than just to show you the tool. But we have a little mound. It's actually a big mound. It's hard to tell the scale when there's nothing on the map, but this is actually a pretty decent sized mound. Either way, I can hold it down and it'll just go up in one area. I can kind of feather it more like this by just keep moving my mouse. And yeah, that's the Sculpt tool. We can smooth this out now. Make those edges a little less rough. If I really want to smooth it, I can increase the strength of my tool. Now it's going to smooth it more harshly. We can also do flatten, where when I do flatten, I like to set strength 1. So if I'm flattening it, I'm really flattening it. But let's say I really liked the height of this particular part of the mound and I needed a large section to be that exact height. I can take that and just flatten it. Flattens it at whatever height you clicked on. So then I can continue out here. And then, oh, I didn't want this section. Let's say I can flatten down here and kind of chop that off. So the flatten tool is pretty useful. I used it a lot when making breast for like city stuff. Or if you have kind of a hill and you need to put a house, the house, you know, they flatten it out for the foundation of the house and stuff. So yeah, that's the basics of the Sculpt tool. In a later tutorial, I'll go through more like techniques and stuff like that. But just for how to use the tool, that is fundamentally how you use the Sculpt tool. Next, we're just going to show how you place objects, just literally how it's done. So like I said, I like to have 3 content browsers here. So I'm just going to come up to the base content folder here. And the way I usually like to do this is this one I don't use super often, but I will like have materials here or something. That's why I have these material filters. So let me show you quick how to add these filters. So right now I have these filters here. If I wanted, let's say, a foliage, or I do have a static mesh foliage. Well, let's just see. If I wanted a different filter, I just click on the filter button. There are a bunch of different things I can choose from. These are basic ones, and then if there's something more specific I wanted, I could go in here to the drop downs. So let's just say I wanted to see procedural foliage spawners. I could add that, and now this is showing me all the procedural foliage spawners that are in this folder, which is the base game folder. I could also search for something with this filter on, leaf, and now it's got leaf forest things. So yeah, I like to use this. Static mesh is what we're mostly going to be using on the map. Static mesh is going to be just pretty much every object Technically, you can put skeletal meshes too. You want to try to avoid that. They're a little more performance intensive, but maybe you want like to decorate an area with some rifle or a helmet, like you're just set dressing a little. Some of those might only exist as skeletal meshes. It is okay to put them on the map, but you want to avoid doing it too much because it's a little bit more performance intensive, but it matters more if you're going to have like 20-30,000 actors on the map, which is generally speaking pretty unlikely unless you're going for a city map or something. So we'll keep the static mesh filter on. And then here is kind of where I like to navigate. So when you're looking for assets, sometimes it's easier to just search, but sometimes things aren't called what you might think they're called. So it's easier to browse through the folders. So let's go, we want to go into the PostScriptum folder. You can sometimes use things that are just in the content folder, like content environments, rather than going into PostScriptum first. But you want to be careful. Not all of this stuff is actually packaged in the game file. So you might place it on your map and it looks fine in the editor. Then you go and test out your mod in the game and the asset is invisible because it doesn't actually exist in the game files. That's more likely to happen with stuff that's not in the PostScriptum folder, but unfortunately it also happens with stuff in the PostScriptum folder. There's not much you can do about that, unfortunately. You just got to test it out and see what works. But we'll go into the PostScriptum folder. We'll go into environment. That's where most of our static meshes are going to be. And we can go, there's building, there's buildings, and then everything is generally also sorted by chapter. So anything in chapter 1 like is just going to be in building here. But then if I want a chapter 4 building, it's going to be in bulge buildings, or it might be in Watch on the Rhine. So you'll have to kind of learn the file structure that the game uses. It gets a little annoying sometimes. Their naming conventions aren't always the best. But yeah, sometimes it will be easier to find things. Like if I know I'm making a chapter 3 map, like Chef DuPont lines up pretty well with chapter 3, then it might just make sense for me to go to Day of Days buildings, and then I can start searching for the buildings I want here. So maybe I know I want a farmhouse, and I've got a bunch of different farmhouses here. So one thing you could also do though is maybe I know I want a house. I could search here with my filter, do house, and then it gives me anything with the word house in it. It'll also sometimes give you things in a folder called house, if something like that exists. But yeah, so these are kind of the two main ways to find your assets. We're just going to go here and we're going to place a few houses down. So we're going to take this farmhouse 76A. We're just going to drag and drop it right on to the map. And then once it's on the map, we have this thing here, which is called your gizmo. And this gizmo is how you can interact with the object once it's on the map. So we have the X, Y, and Z axes here. You can move things strictly according to one axis if you want by holding on the arrow. You can also click on this little square here between these two axes to move it anywhere on this plane, which is helpful. And then you can also select the different modes. So this is the select and transform mode we have on the gizmo. We can change it to the rotate mode, and then we can rotate it along different axes. Probably won't want to rotate along that axis for our house, but we could. And then scale. Scale, again, we can do just along one axis. We could do just along a plane, or we can do uniform across all axes. Now, obviously, we're not going to want to be rescaling houses, but you want to do it with stuff like boxes. So if you placed a box down, maybe you want some bigger boxes, some smaller boxes, etc. But clicking up here each time is kind of annoying. to switch between. Luckily, there are hotkeys. You can see them listed here. So W, E, and R to switch between them, which I use all the time. So W, E, R to switch between the different modes. It'll become like second nature to you as you do things. We also have some other settings up here that we'll look at. So this is the transform gizmo going between the coordinates, going between world and local. So by default, it's on local. So when you're using this transform gizmo, it's in relation to this asset. So the x-axis as it's determined by this asset. And most of the time, this is going to be how you're using this. But there are some instances, like if you group some objects together, sometimes things get a little weird, where maybe you're going to want to click this and change it to global, which if we were to rotate this, we'll see a bigger difference. So maybe that's too much. If we switch this here, we can see how this gizmo changes its like default orientation based on if we're on local, where it's everything relative to the house, or world, where now it's relative to the landscape instead. And actually, I think the x-axis points north. So I was saying earlier I needed to find which way was north. I think I just found it, so that's handy. There's also surface snapping. So let's go here. We're going to search for a crate. And we're going to place a box on a slope here. Try to find a more gradual slope. So if I take this box and place it here, it doesn't conform with the slope of the terrain, which sometimes that might be good. That might be what we want. But we might want it to conform with the terrain. So we can click on this button here, surface snapping, and check the box. And then as we move this around, it will conform to the slope of the terrain. Gets a little wonky when you get to like really steep areas, as you can see. But yeah, this is really useful for placing things like boxes where you might want it to conform to the terrain. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off. We're also going to look at this here, snapping objects to a rotation grid. When I first started mapping, I didn't like this, but I think I was stupid for that. I highly, highly recommend you keep this on for almost all the time. Because if you keep this to 5 degrees, you still get pretty detailed rotation. Like you can rotate this and it snaps every 5 degrees. But what this is really useful for is if I put a building here and then let's say I want another building, just choose this one, and I want this building to kind of butt up against it. If you're snapped to 5 degrees, it's going to be so much easier to line these up. Or if you want boxes against the side here, it's so much easier to line this up when you snap to every 5 degrees so that you get nice flush surfaces, which will also be important for things like fences. Actually, I'll probably do wall here. And we'll just take that. It's a big wall. Like you can line it up nice to be perpendicular, to be nice and flush. And maybe like with this particular wall, maybe we don't want it that tall. We only want it like that. So yeah, I highly recommend going to every 5 degrees on this tool. You can turn it off where you'll be able to rotate completely freely. But I think you should only do that in circumstances where you cannot use the 5 degrees because something won't line up the way you want it. yeah, the next thing we're going to go over copying and pasting. So if I wanted to make a wall, I could go through here, place this wall, and then line up this wall and try to get it to line up perfect, try to get the height right. And, you know, you could do it. It's pretty tedious, but you could do it. But what's much better, if we just move that out of the way, is if you hold down Alt and then move something on this gizmo, you can copy it just by holding Alt. And now you've got a copy from the exact spot, so it's much easier to line these things up. You can also do walls with a spline, but if you wanted a completely straight wall, you don't really need a spline for that. And you can copy and paste easily that way. It's also nice just making more boxes. Maybe turn that a little. But yeah, you get the idea. So holding Alt is how you do that. Very useful. And I think that's about it for placing objects. That's the very basics of how to place objects. In a future tutorial, you know, I'll go through more technique, but this tutorial is just focused on how to actually do the thing. Yeah. So the next thing is a map decal. Oh, actually, one more thing before we get to the map decal. Then the map decal is the last thing. I was talking about lighting before. I don't know if I have a good example, but you might be in a situation where you're trying to place something and it's too dark. If you come up here and click lit and change it to unlit, it looks horrendous, but it gets rid of all shadows and it just kind of does this like artificial global light. So you can use that to edit in dark places. Or if for some reason you didn't have light on your map, if you were doing something where light only comes in via blueprint or whatever, you could do it unlit. So I just wanted to show that. And yeah, I think the last thing we're going to go over is the decal. Let me just look through my notes here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, no, I think we're good to go for the decal. So a decal is something you can place on your map and oh, an autosave. Okay, let's let it autosave. It kind of will help guide you to make your map like a real world place. So most maps in the game are at least based on a real place. And so oftentimes people will want to take a map they found of the place and put it over here as a decal so they can paint roads and bushes and stuff like that in accordance to the map they found. So I'm going to show you quickly how to set that up. So the first thing is you need to find a map. So for this, I'm using the Squad44 website. It's their beta, which you need to be a patron of theirs to see this, but I highly recommend it. You need to find a map, which this is aerial photography from roughly 1950. So it's not quite during World War II, but it's pretty close. It's definitely closer than we would find on satellite imagery today. So this is going to be what I'll use as a basis for my map. But I need a 4x4 kilometer area. I could also go 5x5 if I wanted to stretch the full terrain, but we'll do 4x4 because that's mostly what I'm concerned about getting pretty accurate here. You know, I want to make sure all these fields are accurate, make sure building placement is roughly accurate, and the roads line up, the railroad, etc. So how do I make sure this is 4x4? Well, and this, like Squad44, who knows, maybe he's going to have tools where you can measure it right here. But maybe you're not using Project 44. Maybe you just found a nice satellite or a nice aerial photo somewhere else, and you need to know what 4x4 kilometers is. So for that, I'm going to recommend you go to Google Earth. And I already have Chef DuPont here for Google Earth. And I did measure this out ahead of time, so I can do this a little more quickly for the tutorial video. But it has this nice tool for measure distance and area. So I know that for what I need, it needs to go roughly here in the top right corner. And as I drag this out, it tells me how long this line is. So I want to get this as reasonably close to 4,000 meters as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you get it, the more accurate your decal will be. So we'll do that. I'll click there, and then I'll come down till it says 8,000, which is going to be right about there. Then I'll come over till it says 12. And what we're doing here is we're just trying to find where the basic landmarks are going to be. We're going to close the shape. So the perimeter is 16.02 kilometers, area 15.99 kilometers. So we got it pretty close. And what we have now is we have some landmarks we can use. So we know this corner is right by this intersection where this house is. This corner is sort of like at the apex of this kind of curve right here in the hedgerows. This corner is after this intersection. This is probably a cloud shadow, so that's not a good landmark, but we can kind of remember this shape. And this corner doesn't really have much, maybe just like this. I don't even know if that's a hedge, I guess, yeah. Anyway, but we have sort of landmarks we can go by. So if we go to Project 44 now, I already have this set up, and I don't want to take too much time here, but I can tell you that this is the top right corner building. This is that apex with the corner up here. Then this is the intersection, and like this is about where the cloud shadow was. And then we have our not very clear things over here, but I think it was like roughly here or something with the hedges. So we now have our landmarks for where we should aim. And if you took the snipping tool and snipped out an area, which I did ahead of time, you would have something like this. And now you have a roughly 4x4 kilometer image. All right, I didn't have time to finish doing the decal portion of this tutorial last time, so I'm recording the rest of it today, but to you, it just looks like the same. All right, so first, if you do need to figure out which way is north on your landscape, it does seem that if you click on your landscape, this gizmo is always in the northwest corner, at least from what I can tell. So that'll be important for placing your decal. When you have your texture for your decal ready, all you need to do is just drag and drop that right into whatever folder you've made for it. Then we can close that. And then now we need to turn this into a material. You can't just drag and drop the texture right onto the map. It needs to be a material. So we're going to go right click material, or you can do add import material. Either way, we're going to call this Chef DuPont map decal right there. My chair is very squeaky. And then we want to add, well, before we actually add that, we need to change some settings here. The material domain needs to be deferred decal. The blend mode, it could probably stay opaque. I've always done translucent because for a lot of decals I want them to be able to kind of have some transparency through a wall or something, like if I'm putting an advertisement on a building. I don't know if it matters so much for the map decal, but we'll just do it that way just in case. We don't need to do anything with ray tracing, and that's probably fine for all our settings. Then we want to right click and add a texture sample. So I'll just start typing texture and texture sample comes up. And then right here where it says texture, we will drag and drop our texture. And then we need to connect RGB to base color and the alpha channel to opacity. And that should be all we need for the decal. So we'll save that. And then over here on the left, place actors. I very rarely use this tab, but one thing I do use it for is if I need to add a decal. If I need to add like a cube because I need some like elevated platform and there's not a good one, an asset or something, I'll just drag a cube in and put a material on it. That's something I can show in a later tutorial. But for now, I'll just search decal. We will put the decal down here. And then in the decal material, you'll drag and drop this. Now, right now we don't see anything, but that's because this is probably really tiny. And it is very tiny. So I think I should have looked up what my settings were for other decals, but I want to say, well, let's just see what happens if we try it this default size. And then if we scale this up, the X, we do want it to be tall. The X is the height in this case, because as we deform the terrain in the next tutorial, we want to make sure that the decal is still present on top of the terrain. So we'll make the height like there. I think it was 8,000. Oh, that's probably too big. Yeah, maybe it was 800. And then we want to make sure the location is at the middle of the map. And that should have us set up. So I want to make sure it looks like it's roughly on the 4x4 kilometer border here, which it looks like it just about is. And now we have our map decal to start mapping. We have all our fields, our hedgerows, our roads, our buildings. And one thing that it might be a good idea to check just to make sure your scale is appropriate is if you find, I'll try to find a lone building somewhere. Might be hard to find a lone building here, but maybe that's one. Either way, I would just want to come over here and plop down a building on top and make sure the scale seems about right. Looks like there's not really a lot of lone buildings here. Well, here we have like a little barn, it looks like. So if we search barn, we'll get one of these classic long barns. Although, so this is something with the SDK. Sometimes they like to call barns sheds. So yeah, we'll get one of these. And oops, I don't have this on. That takes up roughly the same size as the shadow. If I felt like it was way off, I could scale this decal up or down a little bit, but it should be pretty close since we tried to section off a 4x4 kilometer area when we took the image, and it looks like it's roughly a 4x4 kilometer area occupied here. So it should be pretty close, and it doesn't have to be exact. You're going to have some creative freedom here anyway. But yeah, that is about everything you need to get started with creating a map in the Squad44 SDK. In the next tutorial, we're going to go over more landscape functions. So we'll go over splines, we'll go over sculpting, we'll go over painting, and make sure you know how to use all of those tools. But that's it for this tutorial. If you have any further questions, just leave it in a comment below, and I will try to address it in a future tutorial. But other than that, happy mapping.